The crowd gathered at the Williamsburg, Texas church fell silent as the young bride, Fiona Campbell, stood abandoned at the altar for the third time in 3 years. Her wedding dress, carefully let out at the seams to accommodate her ample figure, suddenly felt like a costume in a cruel play rather than a symbol of joy. The whispers began like a prairie wind, soft at first, then growing in intensity as the realization spread that Thomas Hardwick had followed in the footsteps of Jonathan Miller and Frederick Pierce, before him leaving Fiona to face the pitying stares of the entire town. The year was 1875, and Williamsburg was still recovering from the war that had torn the nation apart a decade earlier. The small Texas town had seen its share of hardship, but nothing quite like the spectacle of Fiona Campbell's repeated heartbreak. "Poor girl," whispered Mabel Johnson to her husband. "3 times now, you'd think she'd learn." Tears streamed down Fiona's round face as she clutched her bouquet of wildflowers so tightly that stems snapped between her fingers. At 26, she wasn't considered a spinster yet, but with 3 failed weddings behind her, prospects seemed dim. Her father, Pastor James Campbell, stood beside her, his face a mask of controlled fury. "I apologize for the inconvenience," Pastor Campbell announced to the assembled guests, his voice tight. "It appears the wedding will not take place today. Please join us for the prepared meal in the church hall." Fiona wanted to disappear. She wanted the wooden floor beneath her feet to open up and swallow her whole. Instead, she forced herself to walk down the aisle, past the faces that had witnessed her humiliation multiple times now. Her mother met her at the back of the church, wrapping protective arms around her daughter's shaking shoulders. "Come, my dear, let's get you home." Outside the church, a stranger leaned against the hitching post, watching the proceedings with curious eyes. Ethan Palmer had only arrived in Williamsburg the previous day, looking for work and a fresh start after years of driving cattle north from Texas. At 32, the cowboy had seen much of the western frontier, but the sight of the crying bride emerging from the church caught him by surprise. "Another one," muttered an old man standing nearby. "Third man to leave that fat Campbell girl at the altar." Ethan frowned at the callous remark. The woman might be larger than most, but there was a sweetness to her face that struck him even through her tears. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight, and despite her obvious distress, she carried herself with a quiet dignity. "Shame," Ethan said, more to himself than to the old-timer beside him. The old man snorted. "Reckon so, though you'd think after the second time she'd stop trying." Something about the old man's dismissive tone rankled Ethan. He'd never been one to judge a person by appearance, having learned long ago that true character ran deeper than skin. "Seems to me," Ethan said quietly, "that a woman brave enough to try again after being hurt shows more courage than most." The old man gave him a curious look before shuffling away, leaving Ethan to watch as Fiona and her parents climbed into their wagon. Something about her lingered in his mind as he turned and headed toward the saloon. He needed work, and the saloon was often the best place to hear about opportunities. Fiona sat silently in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the small mirror on her dresser. Her mother had helped her out of the wedding dress, which now lay in a white heap on the floor. She wore a simple house dress, but still felt exposed, vulnerable, 3 times. 3 different men. Each had courted her, proposed to her, made her believe that they saw beyond her size to the person she truly was. And each had abandoned her at the last moment. "Fiona," her mother's gentle voice came through the door. "May I come in?" "Yes, Mama," she replied, wiping her eyes quickly. Margaret Campbell entered, carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. She set it on the small table by the window and sat beside her daughter on the bed. "I know nothing I say will ease your pain right now," she said, taking Fiona's hand, "but this is not your burden to bear. The shame belongs to Thomas, not to you." Fiona nodded, though she didn't fully believe it. "I don't understand, Mama. Thomas said he loved me. He said my size didn't matter to him." Margaret sighed. Some men lack the courage to stand by their convictions when faced with the opinions of others. I should have known better after Jonathan and Frederick. Fiona's voice caught. What's wrong with me, Mama? Nothing is wrong with you, my dear girl. You are exactly as God made you, kind, intelligent, and beautiful. Not beautiful enough, apparently, Fiona replied bitterly. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. The right man will see your true beauty, and when he does, nothing will keep him from your side. Fiona wanted to believe her mother, but after 3 abandonments, hope felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the general store, studying a notice board covered with various advertisements and job postings. He'd spent the previous evening at the saloon, gathering information about Williamsburg and its inhabitants. The town was growing, situated as it was on a trade route between larger cities, and there seemed to be work available for a man with his skills. "You looking for something specific?" asked the storekeeper, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Work," Ethan replied. "I've got experience with horses, cattle, building just about anything that needs doing." The storekeeper nodded thoughtfully. "Pastor Campbell was in earlier, mentioned he's looking for someone to help rebuild his barn. Storm took half the roof off last month." Ethan remembered the pastor from yesterday, the father of the bride left at the altar. "Where might I find him? Church is just down the road, parsonage is right beside it, can't miss it." Ethan thanked him and headed in the direction indicated. The morning sun was already hot, promising another scorching Texas day. As he approached the church, he noticed a woman in the garden beside the parsonage, kneeling among rows of vegetables. It was her, the bride from yesterday. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair tied back with a ribbon. She was focused on her task, unaware of his approach until his shadow fell across her. Fiona looked up, startled to see a stranger standing at the garden fence. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame that spoke of physical work. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Dark hair peeked out from beneath his worn cowboy hat. "Can I help you?" she asked, quickly wiping soil from her hands onto her apron. "I'm looking for Pastor Campbell," Ethan replied. "Heard he might have work available." Fiona's expression changed, a flash of embarrassment crossing her features. She wondered if this man knew about yesterday's humiliation. "He's inside," she said, gesturing toward the house. "I'm his daughter, Fiona." Ethan removed his hat. "Ethan Palmer. Just arrived in town yesterday." He deliberately didn't mention seeing her at the church. "Welcome to Williamsburg, Mr. Palmer. I'll take you to my father." She led him to the parsonage, conscious of her size as she walked ahead of him. She'd grown accustomed to the way men's eyes often shifted away from her, uncomfortable with her large frame. But when she glanced back, Ethan was looking directly at her, his expression open and respectful. Inside, Pastor Campbell sat at his desk, working on his sermon for the coming Sunday. He looked up as Fiona entered with Ethan. "Father, this is Mr. Palmer. He's inquiring about the barn repair." Pastor Campbell stood, extending his hand. "James Campbell, pleased to meet you, Mr. Palmer." "Likewise, sir. I understand you need help rebuilding a barn." "Indeed we do. Had a nasty storm come through last month, tore off half the roof and damaged the east wall. I've been patching it as best I can, but it needs proper work." He studied Ethan carefully. "You have experience with such things?" "Yes, sir. Worked as a ranch hand for years, built plenty of structures." "I can show you references if needed." The pastor nodded. "That won't be necessary for now. The Lord teaches us to trust, after all." He glanced at his daughter. "Fiona, perhaps you could bring us some coffee while Mr. Palmer and I discuss the details." Fiona nodded and left the room, feeling a strange flutter in her stomach. There was something different about Ethan Palmer. He looked at her as if he actually saw her, not just her size. In the kitchen, she prepared the coffee, trying to push away thoughts of yesterday's disaster. She had decided last night that she was done with courtship, done with marriage prospects. 3 times abandoned was enough to teach even the most stubborn woman a lesson. When she returned with the coffee, Her father and Ethan were discussing wages and materials. She set the tray down and poured for them both. "Thank you, Miss Campbell," Ethan said, accepting the cup from her. "Mr. Palmer will start tomorrow," her father explained. "He'll be staying in the small cabin behind the barn during the repairs." Fiona nodded, surprised. The cabin was rarely used, just a simple one-room structure for occasional travelers or church visitors. "I'll make sure it's prepared," she said. "Much appreciated," Ethan replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly. Later that afternoon, Fiona cleaned the cabin, sweeping out dust and changing the bedding. It was a simple place but comfortable enough for a single man. As she worked, she thought about Ethan Palmer. There was something reassuring about him, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with Thomas's nervous energy. She caught herself and shook her head. She had no business assessing another man, not when the wound of rejection was still so fresh. Besides, men like Ethan Palmer, handsome, capable, weren't interested in women like her. She'd learned that lesson 3 times over. Ethan began work on the barn early the next morning. The damage was substantial but fixable. He started by removing the broken beams and salvaging what lumber he could. Around mid-morning, Fiona appeared with a pitcher of lemonade and some bread. "Thought you might need refreshment," she said, setting the items on a small table near the barn entrance. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Campbell," Ethan replied, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. "It's thirsty work." She poured him a glass, which he accepted gratefully. As he drank, she noticed the strength in his hands, calloused from years of manual labor. "Have you been in Texas long, Mr. Palmer?" she asked, making conversation. "Most of my life. Born in Missouri, but my family moved to Texas when I was young. Been roaming the Western Territories for the past 10 years or so." He took another drink. "This is fine lemonade." "Thank you," she hesitated. "And what brings you to Williamsburg? It's not exactly on the main trail." Ethan shrugged. "Time for a change, I suppose. Been driving cattle north for too many seasons. Thought I might settle somewhere for a spell." Fiona nodded, understanding the desire for stability. "Well, Williamsburg is a good town, mostly. People are friendly enough." She glanced away, remembering the pitying looks she'd received after each failed wedding. Ethan noticed her discomfort. "Miss Campbell, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but you seem troubled." She looked up, surprised by his directness. Well, I've had some disappointments recently." "I heard something about that," he admitted. "In the saloon last night." Fiona's face flushed with embarrassment. "I suppose the whole town is talking about it. People talk. That's what they do when they have empty lives of their own." His voice was gentle, without judgment. "For what it's worth, I think any man who'd leave a woman at the altar isn't worth her tears." The simple statement touched Fiona deeply. "Thank you, Mr. Palmer, that's kind of you to say, just speaking the truth as I see it." He finished his lemonade and set the glass down. "And please call me Ethan. Mr. Palmer makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and tie." A small smile curved her lips. "Then you must call me Fiona." "It would be my pleasure, Fiona." Over the next week, Ethan made steady progress on the barn. Each day, Fiona would bring him refreshments, and they would talk for a few minutes before she returned to her duties. She found herself looking forward to these brief encounters, though she tried to guard her heart against developing any attachment. One afternoon, as Ethan worked on the roof beams, Fiona approached with her usual offering of lemonade. She called up to him, shielding her eyes from the sun. Taking a break might be wise in this heat. Ethan climbed down the ladder, his shirt sticking to his back from sweat. "You're right about that. Sun's fierce today." As they sat in the shade of a large oak tree near the barn, Ethan asked, "Have you lived in Williamsburg all your life?" "Yes," Fiona replied. "Never ventured much beyond the county line. My father was called to pastor this church before I was born." "And you never wanted to see other places?" She considered the question. "I suppose I've dreamed of it, reading books about faraway cities and landscapes, but," she hesitated, "women don't have many opportunities to travel alone." "That's true enough," Ethan agreed. though I've met some remarkable women on my travels who have forged their own paths. Really? Fiona leaned forward, intrigued. What were they like? Ethan smiled, remembering. There was a woman in Colorado who ran her own stagecoach station after her husband died. Toughest person I ever met, man or woman. And in New Mexico, I knew a woman doctor who traveled to remote villages to help the sick. They sound extraordinary, Fiona said wistfully. They were, but not because they did things differently than others expected. They were extraordinary because they were true to themselves. He looked at her directly. Like you. Fiona blinked in surprise. Me, I'm afraid there's nothing extraordinary about me, Ethan. I disagree, he said simply. It takes courage to face each day after being hurt. I've seen many a man broken by less than what you've endured. His words touched something deep inside her. No one had ever described her as courageous before. I don't feel very brave, she admitted softly. That's often the way of it. The bravest folks I've known rarely recognize their own courage. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Pastor Campbell, returning from a visit to a sick parishioner. How's the work progressing, Mr. Palmer? He called as he approached. Ahead of schedule, sir, Ethan replied, standing respectfully. Should have the roof completed by tomorrow if the weather holds. Excellent news. The Lord has blessed us with your skilled hands. The pastor turned to his daughter. Fiona, your mother needs help with preparations for the church social on Saturday. Yes, Father. Fiona gathered the empty glasses and pitcher. To Ethan, she said, Thank you for the conversation. He tipped his hat. My pleasure, Miss Campbell. As she walked back to the house, Fiona felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Ethan Palmer saw something in her that others, including herself, often missed. It was a dangerous feeling, this budding hope. She had been fooled before by kind words and appreciative glances. Yet something about Ethan felt different, more substantial somehow. That evening at dinner, Pastor Campbell spoke highly of Ethan's work. The man knows his craft, he said, passing a plate of cornbread to his wife, and he works without complaint or unnecessary chatter. He seems a decent sort, Margaret Campbell agreed. Where did you say he's from originally? Missouri, I believe, though he's been in Texas most of his life. A wanderer, from what I gather. Fiona listened silently, absorbing every detail about Ethan. Will he be attending the social on Saturday? Her mother asked. I've invited him, Pastor Campbell replied. Thought it would be good for him to meet more of the community if he's planning to stay in Williamsburg. The church social was a monthly tradition, bringing together families from town and surrounding farms for food, music, and fellowship. Fiona usually enjoyed these gatherings, though she suspected this one might be awkward given recent events. I wonder if I should go, she said quietly. People will be talking. Her father's expression softened. Fiona, hiding away won't stop the gossip. Better to hold your head high and show them all that your worth isn't determined by Thomas Hardwick or any other man. Your father's right, dear, her mother added. Besides, Mrs. Greenwood specifically asked if you'd help with the dessert table. She says no one arranges things as beautifully as you do. Fiona nodded, though anxiety curled in her stomach at the thought of facing the entire town so soon after her public humiliation. Saturday arrived with perfect weather-clear skies and a gentle breeze that kept the Texas heat at bay. The church grounds had been transformed with tables covered in white cloths, lanterns hanging from tree branches for when evening fell, and a small wooden platform where musicians would play for dancing later. Fiona helped her mother prepare their contributions, 3 apple pies and a large pot of beef stew before changing into her best day dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair. She pinched her cheeks for color and tied a matching ribbon in her hair, then studied her reflection critically. Her face was pretty enough, with clear skin, bright eyes, and a generous mouth that smiled easily. But her body had always been her burden large since childhood, despite her active lifestyle and moderate appetite. She sighed, smoothing the fabric over her ample curves. There was no hiding her size, so she might as well carry it with as much dignity as possible. When she arrived at the social with her parents, several people greeted her warmly, though she noticed others whispering behind their hands as she passed. She focused on her task, arranging desserts on the long table with artistic precision. "That looks mighty tempting," came a familiar voice behind her. Fiona turned to find Ethan, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, though he still had his worn cowboy hat. "The desserts or my arrangement of them?" she asked with a small smile. "Both," he replied with a wink that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest, "though I must admit a particular weakness for apple pie." "Then you're in luck. My mother made 3. Your mother's pies in your company." "This social is proving better than I expected." Before Fiona could respond, Mrs. Greenwood appeared, a thin woman with a perpetually worried expression. "Fiona, dear, you've done a lovely job as always." Her eyes darted to Ethan curiously. "Mrs. Greenwood, this is Mr. Palmer," Fiona introduced. "He's repairing our barn." "A pleasure, madam," Ethan said politely. Mrs. Greenwood nodded. "Welcome to Williamsburg, Mr. Palmer. I hope you'll enjoy our little gathering." To Fiona, she added, "The Hardwick family sent their regrets. They won't be attending today." The statement was meant to be comforting, Fiona knew, but it only highlighted her situation. "Thank you for letting me know," she replied stiffly. After Mrs. Greenwood moved on, Ethan said quietly, "Hardwick. Would that be—" "Yes," Fiona interrupted. "The most recent disappointment." Ethan's expression darkened. "Coward couldn't even face you afterward." The blunt assessment surprised Fiona. "I suppose not." "Well, his loss is my gain," Ethan said. "Now I don't have to share your company with him." The simple statement warmed Fiona from within. "You're being kind." "Not kind, honest." He gestured toward the refreshment table. "Would you care for some lemonade? Seems only fair I should serve you for once." As the afternoon progressed, Ethan remained by Fiona's side, engaging her in conversation and deflecting curious stares with his easy manner. When the musicians began to play and couples moved to the dance area, Fiona prepared herself for the usual experience of watching from the sidelines. To her surprise, Ethan extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor of a dance, Miss Campbell?" Fiona hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer, I'm afraid." "That makes 2 of us. We can stumble through it together." His smile was so genuine, his hand so steadily offered, that Fiona found herself accepting despite her reservations. As they joined the other couples, she was acutely aware of whispers and stares. "Everyone's looking," she murmured as Ethan's hand settled respectfully at her waist. "Let them look," he replied, his voice low and reassuring. "They're seeing a beautiful woman dancing with the luckiest man at the social." Fiona's eyes widened at the compliment, searching his face for any sign of mockery. She found none. "You shouldn't say such things if you don't mean them," she said cautiously. Ethan's expression grew serious. "Fiona, in my 32 years, I've learned that life's too short for false words. When I say something, I mean it." They moved together to the music, and though neither was particularly graceful, Fiona found herself enjoying the dance more than any in recent memory. Ethan's hand was warm and steady against hers, his steps confident enough to lead but adaptable to her rhythm. When the music ended, he didn't immediately release her hand. "Thank you for the dance," he said. "Would you walk with me for a bit? It's getting rather warm in here." Fiona nodded, and they made their way outside. The evening was settling in, with lanterns now glowing against the deepening blue sky. They strolled toward the church garden, where benches had been placed among flowering shrubs. "You surprised me today," Fiona admitted as they sat. "How so?" "Most men." She hesitated. "Most men don't seek out my company, especially not for dancing." Ethan considered this. "Most men are fools, then." Fiona laughed softly. "You're very direct, Mr. Palmer." "Ethan," he reminded her. "And yes, I've been told that before. Some find it off-putting." "I find it refreshing," she admitted. "There's been too much pretense in my life recently." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "May I ask you something personal, Fiona?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "These men who left you, did they give any reason?" The question stung, but Fiona appreciated his straightforwardness. Not directly, no, they simply didn't appear, though I know the reason well enough. She gestured to her body. I'm not the kind of woman men dream of marrying. That's ridiculous, Ethan said flatly. Is it? 3 men have reached the same conclusion. 3 men have proven themselves unworthy of you. His voice was firm. A man who cannot stand by his word is no man at all. They sat in silence for a moment, the music and laughter from the social floating to them on the evening breeze. My father says you're a wanderer, Fiona said eventually. Will you stay in Williamsburg once the barn is finished? Ethan leaned back, looking up at the emerging stars. I've been considering it. Seems like a decent town. Might see if the livery stable needs help or try my hand at something new. What would make you want to settle somewhere? She asked, curious about this man who seemed so different from others she'd known. He thought for a moment before answering. Honest work, good people. He glanced at her. A reason to stay. The simple words hung between them, laden with possibility. Fiona felt her heart quicken but reminded herself not to read too much into a friendly conversation. She'd been fooled before by kind words. It's getting late, she said, standing. I should find my parents. Ethan rose as well. I'll walk you back. As they returned to the church hall, Fiona noticed Thomas Hardwick's sister Charlotte standing with a group of young women. Charlotte spotted them and whispered something that made the others turn and stare. Fiona felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. Ethan noticed her discomfort. Something wrong, Charlotte Hardwick, Fiona explained quietly. Thomas's sister. She never approved of our engagement. Ah, Ethan said, understanding. Well, she's done you a favor then, hasn't she? Saved you from joining her family. The unexpected perspective made Fiona smile despite her discomfort. I hadn't thought of it that way. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments, Ethan said. At least that's been my experience. Before Fiona could respond, Charlotte approached, her expression falsely sympathetic. Fiona, dear, how brave of you to attend so soon after. Well, you know. Her eyes flicked to Ethan with undisguised curiosity. Hello, Charlotte, Fiona replied evenly. I'd like to introduce Mr. Ethan Palmer. He's new to Williamsburg. Ethan, this is Miss Charlotte Hardwick. Ethan tipped his hat politely, though his eyes remained cool. Miss Hardwick, Charlotte smiled thinly. Mr. Palmer, how quickly you've made friends in our little town. The implication was clear, and Fiona felt her confidence waver. Miss Campbell has been kind enough to show me some hospitality, Ethan replied, his voice pleasant but with an edge of steel. Something I've found characteristic of the better people in Williamsburg. Charlotte's smile faltered at the subtle rebuke. Yes, well, enjoy the remainder of the social. She retreated to her friends, who immediately huddled closer to hear her report. You handled that well, Fiona said quietly. Ethan shrugged. I've dealt with rattlesnakes before. The principle's about the same: stand your ground and don't show fear. Fiona laughed, a genuine sound that drew smiles from those nearby. I'll remember that advice. They rejoined the social, and though Fiona was conscious of curious glances, Ethan's steady presence beside her made them easier to bear. When it was time to leave, he walked her and her parents back to the parsonage. At the door, Pastor Campbell extended his hand. Thank you for your help setting up and taking down the tables, Mr. Palmer. Most appreciated. Happy to help, sir. Will we see you at services tomorrow? Margaret Campbell asked. Yes, madam, I'll be there. As her parents went inside, Fiona lingered on the porch. Thank you for your company today, Ethan. It made the social much more bearable than I'd anticipated. The pleasure was mine, truly. He hesitated, then said, Fiona, I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it. Fiona's heart skipped a beat, but caution tempered her response. Ethan, I'm flattered, but I think you should know that I've decided not to pursue courtship again. 3 failures are quite enough for any woman. Ethan considered her words. I understand your hesitation, but I'm not asking for a commitment, just a chance to know you better. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why would you want to court me when there are plenty of other women who haven't been rejected multiple times? When there are women who look, she gestured to herself, who look different than I do, Ethan's expression grew serious. Fiona, I've met many people in my travels. Beautiful women, clever women, wealthy women, but I've rarely met someone with your kind of quiet strength and genuine heart. He took a breath. As for your appearance, you're beautiful to me. Your eyes light up when you laugh, your hands create beauty whether arranging flowers or desserts, and your figure, he smiled slightly, is exactly as a woman should be, in my opinion. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes at his sincerity. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me call on you, we'll take it slowly, no pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other better. She thought of all the reasons to refuse the risk of another heartbreak, the town gossip, her own insecurities. But looking at Ethan's open, honest face, she found herself nodding. All right, you may call on me. His smile was worth the risk. Thank you, Fiona, I'll see you at church tomorrow. As she watched him walk toward the cabin behind the barn, Fiona felt a dangerous spark of hope ignite in her heart. She tried to temper it with caution, reminding herself that she had been disappointed before. Yet something about Ethan Palmer felt different, more substantial, more genuine than the men who had courted her previously. She went inside, closing the door softly behind her. The following weeks established a pattern. Ethan continued his work on the barn, which expanded to include repairs on the church roof and other tasks around the property. Each evening, he would join the Campbell family for dinner, and afterward, he and Fiona would sit on the porch, talking until twilight deepened into night. Fiona learned that Ethan had lost both parents to influenza when he was 20, after which he'd taken to a wandering life. He had an older sister in Missouri whom he visited occasionally, and a natural talent for working with horses that had served him well during his years as a cowboy. In turn, she shared stories of growing up as the pastor's daughter, her love of books and gardening, and her dreams of someday seeing more of the world beyond Williamsburg. She gradually told him more about her failed engagements, how each man had seemed genuinely attracted to her, only to disappear when the wedding day arrived. I never understood it, she admitted one evening in late June as they sat watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Each of them claimed to love me as I was. Jonathan said my size made me more womanly. Frederick said he admired my strength. Thomas said my curves were beautiful. She sighed. Yet none could follow through when it came time to make me their wife. Ethan's jaw tightened in anger on her behalf. Men like that are all talk, no substance. They cared more about what others thought than about their own happiness or yours. Perhaps they simply realized they couldn't bear the thought of a fat wife after all. Fiona, Ethan said firmly, stop punishing yourself for their weakness. Your size doesn't define you, and it certainly doesn't diminish your worth. She looked at him, studying his face in the soft light from the parlor window. You truly believe that, don't you? I do, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it too. The town noticed their developing relationship. Some, like Mrs. Greenwood, expressed quiet approval, seeing Ethan as steady and hardworking. Others, particularly Charlotte Hardwick and her circle, were less kind in their assessments. Rather convenient, isn't it? Charlotte remarked loudly enough to be overheard in the general store one day. A drifter with no prospects suddenly interested in the pastor's daughter. One has to wonder about his true motivations. Fiona, selecting fabric for a new apron, pretended not to hear, though the words stung. When she left the store, she found Ethan waiting outside with the wagon, having completed errands for her father. Ready to head back, he asked, offering his hand to help her up. As she settled beside him on the seat, Ethan noticed her subdued mood. Something happened in there. Fiona hesitated, then decided honesty was best. Charlotte Hardwick was speculating about your motives for courting me. Ethan's expression darkened. That woman needs a hobby besides spreading malice. She implied you might be interested in my father's position. Or his daughter's presumed inheritance. Ethan gave a short laugh. I've no interest in preaching, and as for inheritance, I'm not the kind of man who looks for a woman to support him. I know that, Fiona said quickly, but others might wonder. Ethan guided the horses out of town before responding. Fiona, people will always talk. It's what they do when their own lives lack substance. He glanced at her. Does it bother you what they say? Not about you, she replied truthfully. But I hate the thought of bringing more gossip upon my parents. They've endured enough because of my failed weddings. Have your parents expressed concern about our relationship? No, quite the opposite. They like you very much. Ethan smiled at that, then let others talk. Your parents' approval and your happiness are what matter. By mid-July, the barn was fully repaired, the roof stronger than before. Ethan had taken a position at the livery stable in town, demonstrating his skill with horses and earning the respect of the owner. He rented a small room above the stable, but continued to join the Campbells for dinner several times a week. One Sunday after church, Ethan asked Fiona to join him for a picnic by the creek that ran along the edge of town. Her parents gave their blessing, and soon the couple was settled on a blanket in the shade of a large oak tree, a basket of food between them. This is lovely, Fiona said, looking at the clear water of the creek and the wildflowers dotting the bank. I haven't been out here in years. I discovered it last week while exercising one of the horses, Ethan explained, unpacking bread, cheese, and cold chicken from the basket. Thought you might enjoy the change of scenery. They ate companionably, talking about the sermon that morning and Ethan's work at the stable. When they had finished, Ethan leaned back against the tree trunk, watching Fiona as she arranged the remaining food in the basket. Fiona, he said softly, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. She looked up, noting the serious tone in his voice. What is it? I've been offered a job, a good one, with the railroad company that's expanding through the next county. They need someone to oversee the horses and equipment. Oh, Fiona said, trying to hide her disappointment. That sounds like an excellent opportunity. It is. Better pay than the livery, more responsibility. He paused. But it would mean leaving Williamsburg. Fiona nodded, her heart sinking. When would you go? That depends. On what? Ethan reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. On whether you'll come with me. Fiona's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm asking if you'll marry me, Fiona Campbell. His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. I love you. I have almost from the moment I saw you. Your kindness, your strength, your beauty, all of it. I want to build a life with you, whether here or elsewhere. Fiona stared at him, her heart racing. Ethan, I don't know what to say. You could say yes, he suggested with a gentle smile, but are you certain? After everything that's happened to me, more certain than I've ever been about anything. He squeezed her hand. Fiona, what happened before has nothing to do with us. Those men were fools who didn't deserve you. Tears filled her eyes. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid you'll change your mind like the others. I won't, he said simply, but I understand your fear. Take some time to think about it if you need to. I'm not going anywhere without you. Fiona searched his face, finding only sincerity and love in his expression. In the 3 months since Ethan had arrived in Williamsburg, he had proven himself to be exactly what he appeared: honest, hardworking, and steadfast. He had never once made her feel anything less than beautiful and valued. I don't need time, she said, surprising herself with her certainty. Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you. His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. You've made me the happiest man in Texas, Fiona Campbell. When they returned to the parsonage that afternoon, Ethan formally asked Pastor Campbell for his blessing, which was readily given. Margaret Campbell embraced them both, tears of happiness in her eyes. We'll have a small ceremony, Fiona insisted, just family and close friends. Her parents exchanged glances. Are you sure, dear? Her mother asked. You've always wanted a proper church wedding. Fiona nodded firmly. I've had 3 of those and none ended well. This time I want something different. Ethan supported her decision. Whatever will make you happy is what we'll do. Word spread quickly through Williamsburg about the engagement. Most people expressed good wishes, though there were inevitable whispers about whether this wedding would actually take place. Charlotte Hardwick, upon hearing the news, couldn't resist making her opinion known. She cornered Fiona outside the general store the following week. "Another engagement so soon. My goodness, you are determined, aren't you?" Fiona straightened her shoulders. "I am marrying a good man who loves me, Charlotte. Your brother could have learned something from his example." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "We'll see if he actually appears at the altar, won't we? Fourth time's the charm, perhaps." Before Fiona could respond, Ethan appeared beside her, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "Miss Hardwick," he said coolly, "offering your congratulations, I hope." Charlotte's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, how fortunate you both are to have found each other." "Indeed we are," Ethan replied. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have wedding plans to discuss." As they walked away, Fiona whispered, "Thank you for that." Ethan shook his head. "No need to thank me, though I admit, I'm looking forward to proving her wrong on our wedding day." The wedding was set for August 15, 1875, just 6 weeks after Ethan's proposal. True to Fiona's wishes, it would be a simple ceremony in the garden behind the parsonage, with only a small group of guests. Fiona decided against a traditional white wedding dress, opting instead for a new blue dress that Ethan had once complimented her in. She would carry flowers from her own garden and wear her mother's lace veil. As the day approached, Fiona tried to quell her growing anxiety. Ethan had given her no reason to doubt him, yet the memory of standing alone at the altar 3 times before haunted her dreams. The night before the wedding, Ethan joined the Campbells for dinner as usual. Afterward, he and Fiona walked in the garden, enjoying the cool evening air. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, noticing her quietness. "A little," she admitted. "Old fears die hard, I suppose." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Fiona, I give you my solemn word that I will be waiting for you tomorrow. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." She smiled up at him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I believe you. Good. Because this time tomorrow, you'll be Mrs. Ethan Palmer, and we'll be starting our new life together." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Margaret helped Fiona dress, arranging her auburn hair with sprigs of baby's breath and settling the lace veil over it. "You look beautiful, my darling," she said, tears glistening in her eyes, "and more importantly, you look happy." "I am, Mama. Ethan is. He's everything I never thought I'd find. He's a good man who sees your true worth. That's all your father and I ever wanted for you." A knock at the door preceded Pastor Campbell's entrance. He stopped, his expression softening at the sight of his daughter. "Fiona, my dear child, you're radiant." "Thank you, Father." She smoothed her hands over the blue fabric of her dress. "Is everything ready?" "It is." "And your groom is already in the garden, looking somewhat nervous but very determined." Relief flooded through Fiona. Ethan was there, waiting for her. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Pastor Campbell walked his daughter through the garden to where Ethan stood beneath an arch of roses and wildflowers. Their guests, fewer than 20 in all, watched with smiles as the couple exchanged vows. "I, Ethan James Palmer, take you, Fiona Grace Campbell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. "I promise to love and cherish you, to honor and respect you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as we both shall live." When Fiona repeated her vows, her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes never left Ethan's face. As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Ethan had purchased from the jeweler in the next town, Fiona felt the last of her doubts dissolve. "By the authority vested in me," Pastor Campbell proclaimed with evident joy, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Ethan lifted Fiona's veil and kissed her gently, his hands cupping her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they turned to face their guests, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The reception that followed was a joyful affair, with music and dancing in the garden as the afternoon sun cast golden light across the scene. Ethan never left Fiona's side, his hand often finding hers as they accepted congratulations from their guests. Mrs. Greenwood embraced Fiona warmly. My dear, I couldn't be happier for you. Mr. Palmer is a fine man. Thank you, Mrs. Greenwood, I think so too. As the celebration continued, Fiona noticed Charlotte Hardwick standing at the garden gate, watching the proceedings. Their eyes met briefly before Charlotte turned and walked away. Fiona felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that her happiness was no longer contingent on the approval of people like Charlotte. Later, as the sun began to set, Ethan led Fiona to a waiting wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Ready to go, Mrs. Palmer?" he asked, his eyes bright with happiness. "Yes, Mr. Palmer, I believe I am." After bidding farewell to her parents and their guests, Fiona climbed into the wagon with Ethan's assistance. As they drove away, the sound of cheers and well wishes following them, Ethan turned to his new wife. "Fourth time's the charm," he said with a grin. Fiona laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "Indeed it is." They spent their wedding night in a small but charming room at the hotel in the next town, away from curious eyes and whispers. Ethan was gentle and considerate, his admiration for Fiona's body expressed in tender touches and reverent words that banished any lingering insecurities she might have harbored. The next morning, they began their journey to their new home near the railroad camp where Ethan would work. The company had provided a small house as part of his compensation, and they had arranged for their few belongings to be transported ahead of them. As they traveled, Fiona marveled at the changing landscape, rolling hills giving way to open plains, forests of pine and oak, streams glinting in the sunlight. It was her first real journey beyond Williamsburg, and she absorbed every new sight with wonder. "Is it everything you imagined?" Ethan asked, noticing her excitement. "Better," she replied honestly, "because I'm seeing it with you." Their new home was modest but sturdy, a two-bedroom house with a small porch, situated on the outskirts of a growing settlement that had sprung up around the railroad construction. There were about 50 similar houses, home to other railroad employees and their families, forming a community of their own. Ethan carried Fiona across the threshold, setting her down gently in what would be their parlor. The furniture was simple but functional, with a few personal touches already in place. A quilt made by Margaret Campbell draped over the sofa, books from Fiona's collection arranged on a small shelf. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, watching her explore the space. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "It's ours." In the weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm of life together. Ethan worked long hours overseeing the railroad company's horses and equipment, while Fiona made their house into a home. She planted a small garden, made friends with neighboring wives, and even began teaching reading to some of the workers' children who had limited educational opportunities. Letters arrived regularly from her parents, full of news from Williamsburg and expressions of love. Pastor Campbell wrote that many in the congregation had commented on how happy Fiona had looked on her wedding day and how well suited she and Ethan seemed. One October evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Ethan noticed Fiona's thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, taking her hand. She smiled. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what I'd expected. 6 months ago, I'd given up on ever finding someone who would truly love me. And now—" She squeezed his hand. "Now I wake up every day beside a man who makes me feel beautiful and cherished." "That's because you are beautiful and cherished," Ethan replied simply. "I'm the fortunate one, Fiona. You've given me a home and a purpose beyond just wandering from job to job." As winter approached, bringing colder weather to their little settlement, Fiona discovered she was expecting their first child. She shared the news with Ethan one evening as they sat by the fire in their snug parlor. "A baby," he repeated, his expression shifting from surprise to joy. "We're going to have a baby," Fiona nodded, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "In late spring, the doctor says." Ethan knelt before her chair, placing his hands over hers. "Fiona, my love, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Even though I'll likely be even larger than before," she asked, a hint of old insecurities surfacing. You'll be even more beautiful carrying our child, he assured her, kissing her gently. I love every inch of you, Fiona Palmer, that will never change. The pregnancy progressed well, though Fiona did grow considerably as her body prepared to nurture their child. Far from being deterred, Ethan seemed to find her changing form fascinating and beautiful, his attentiveness never wavering. They wrote to her parents with the news, receiving an enthusiastic response and a promise to visit after the baby was born. The community of railroad families rallied around them as well, with experienced mothers offering advice and practical help to Fiona as her due date approached. On a warm May morning in 1876, after a long night of labor, Fiona gave birth to a healthy son they named James Ethan Palmer in honor of both their fathers. The baby had Ethan's dark hair and Fiona's bright eyes, a perfect blend of his parents. He's magnificent, Ethan whispered, cradling his son for the first time, just like his mother. Fiona watched them together, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. The journey that had brought her here through heartbreak and humiliation to this moment of pure joy seemed almost worth it now. Pastor and Mrs. Campbell arrived 2 weeks later, eager to meet their first grandchild. Their reunion was joyful, with many tears and embraces. You look radiant, my dear, Margaret told her daughter as they sat together in the nursery, little James sleeping peacefully in his grandmother's arms. Motherhood suits you beautifully. I'm happier than I ever thought possible, Fiona admitted. Ethan is the most wonderful husband and father. We knew he was special from the moment he arrived in Williamsburg, her father said, joining them. God's timing is perfect, even when we can't see it through our disappointments. Speaking of Williamsburg, Margaret said carefully, we have some news that might interest you. Thomas Hardwick has left town. Fiona raised her eyebrows in surprise. Left? Why? It seems he became engaged to a young woman from Austin but disappeared the day before their wedding, Pastor Campbell explained. Her brothers came looking for him, and rather than face them, he fled in the night. How terrible for her, Fiona said sincerely. Yes, though she's perhaps fortunate in the long run, as were you, her mother observed. Some men are not meant to be husbands, and Thomas Hardwick appears to be one of them. Later, when Fiona shared the news with Ethan, he shook his head in disgust. That man has made a habit of breaking hearts. The poor woman in Austin has my sympathy. As does Charlotte, Fiona added. Whatever her faults, it can't be easy having such a brother. Ethan smiled, pulling her close. You have the kindest heart of anyone I know, Fiona Palmer. It's one of the many reasons I love you. As their son grew, so did their happiness together. Ethan was promoted within the railroad company, allowing them to add a small extension to their house and put aside savings for their future. Fiona continued teaching reading to local children, finding fulfillment in helping others while raising her son. When James was 2, the Palmers welcomed a daughter, Margaret Rose, named for both grandmothers. Their family felt complete with the arrival of their second child, their home filled with laughter and love. Occasionally, Fiona would think back to the woman she had been in Williamsburg, the woman who had stood alone at the altar 3 times, who had believed herself unworthy of lasting love because of her size. That woman seemed like a stranger now, so different from the confident wife and mother she had become. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Ethan put his arm around Fiona and drew her close. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Leaving Williamsburg, starting over here, Fiona looked up at him, at the face that had become as familiar and beloved as her own. Never. You gave me everything I ever wanted: love, family, adventure. How could I regret that? Ethan kissed her softly. I'm the lucky one. Those other men, I should send them thank you notes for being foolish enough to let you go. Fiona laughed. 4th time's the charm, just like you said. The only time that mattered, he corrected, pulling her closer as they watched the sun set on another day of their life together, a life built on respect, understanding, and love that saw beyond appearances to the true beauty within. In the years that followed, the Palmer family thrived. The railroad settlement grew into a proper town, and Ethan's position grew with it. Fiona established a small school, channeling her love of learning into teaching the community's children. James and Margaret Rose were joined by a third child, a son they named William, when Fiona was 30. Their family was complete, their home filled with the chaos and joy that comes with raising 3 active children. Through it all, Ethan's love for Fiona never diminished. He remained as attentive and appreciative as he had been during their courtship, often telling her that her curves were still his favorite place to rest his hands at the end of a long day. And Fiona, who had once defined herself by rejection, learned to see herself through Ethan's eyes as strong, beautiful, and worthy of the deepest love. The woman who had been left at the altar 3 times had found, in her 4th attempt, not just a husband who stayed, but a partner who celebrated every aspect of who she was. Their love story, born in the aftermath of humiliation, blossomed into one of the great romances of their community, proof that sometimes the greatest happiness comes after the deepest disappointment, and that true love sees with the heart, not with the eyes. 4th time's the charm, indeed.